Strange New Worlds. What can I say? So, I'm not disappointed, not in the least. This was a game I picked up not knowing what to expect from it. When I first picked it up, my intention was more towards a narrative style game, something like Voyage of the Pandora. Obviously, it wasn't going to be exactly like that. But when I saw, the little pictures of the cards that were represented and everything, I thought, this looks cool. All right. There are some CDGs. I heard some people are using at least one person is using cards from the Star Trek CDG, I think, to try to enrich the experience a little bit. But okay. It does not serve as a good narrative game at all. It's not like you're faced with, and I had no idea what to expect. I mean, I really don't know. This is Game Time Games Heritage Models. I had one game by them that I'm aware of, which is Quest, which was an absolute piece of shit, and I have it. It's just not here. And I've heard some people say that Grand Imperialism, some people, swore by it, said, oh, this is a wonderful game and everything. I've had people who've revisited it since their childhood when they had it, comment that, yeah, it really isn't much. I don't know what that means because, honestly, this isn't much either. But what it is gold. It really is. So let's talk about components first, and then we'll get to why this is so special. So the board is none too exciting. It folds out. I don't want to do the whole thing. But it represents, space and the physical closeness of certain objects. And then there's spaces around the side of the board for holding information about what's in all the different planets. Those spaces are alphabetically arranged. That's not a bad choice. It does make it possible to find things. I expected, however, it to be more geometrically placed for whatever reason. Maybe by quarter alphabetically, which would really confuse me the first time I saw it, but would be more helpful. But the fact of the matter is you're all over the board. So it's not like in a game of SE4X where you're concentrated in your own little area and building your own little empire, or most 4X games. And this kind of qualifies as one. Very, very light. The movement, well, let's leave movement alone, but the combat and the economics in this game are very, very simple, as is the exploration quality. So for the exploration quality, you land on a planet and you see what you need to colonize it. And you say, okay, do I have it or not? And it's pretty much a luck-based thing. Some of them are very, very easy to colonize. Some of them are really rough and don't pay out very much. So you have to make some hard calls there. It might be worth doing. There's a lot of room for strategy in the game because of how it ends up developing in the late game. The actual combat is just you compare the values of your crew cards to whatever crew cards you're attacking. A planet can have as many crew cards as it likes. Your ship can only have 4, which means that a planet can be made invincible to a single player's attack. It's possible for multiple players to coordinate and take down a planet. The difficulty there would be in some means of sharing the spoils of it. There's no naval combat or anything like that. You simply move to a planet. Hey, did I take it? Did I not? It has almost a Cosmic Encounter type of feel to it, except in Cosmic Encounter, you lose your pieces. Well, here you lose your crew cards, but your ship is sort of like the cone. It moves around and allows you to attack. It's not as random, though, and it's got a different flavor. The economics is simply all planets produce pretty much $50 each, except those that don't. Some of them produce more, and those can become Very, very valuable. In the play that I had, there was one planet that produced more, and it was probably the richest, well, I'm pretty sure it's the richest planet in the game. There are a couple of others that produce additional money per turn, but nothing along the lines of that one. And that one kind of created a certain dynamic to the game, which I thought was particularly interesting. Movement. Okay. On the main board, on the sort of normal geometry of the board, you can move one space per turn, and I'm saying laterally and horizontally and vertically. Well, laterally is horizontal and vertical, I think. I don't know. Anyway, and it takes quite a while to get from one location to the other. But there's one special case, which is every planet has basically a wormhole, a jump gate, whatever, which are represented by these. They will randomly send you to one other planet or black hole in the game. That takes one move to transit whatever the distance is, and it's completely random what these connections are. The connections end up forming a set of, I'm calling them, directed linked lists, singly linked lists, whatever you want to say. You go from one planet, you can get to the next one, but you can't get back. Unless the two happen to share each other's chits, in which case you just have a little cyclic graph. It's possible everything could connect. It's unlikely. But it's fairly likely that there will be reasonable connections. Now, this causes some serious issues. I didn't talk about all the components. What happened here? This causes some serious issues in terms of understanding how you can get to and from places on the board. And I'll go into that with components, because these little counters are barely readable. I have to take, my eyes are not great anymore. I'm an old man now. But I have to take these under the light. Magnifying glass would be great, but these are not the worst things in the game. These guys are suitable. The glue on them has started to come apart. Other more, more common companies out there, things like Avalon Hill and such not, have counters that fall apart, lose their backings and whatever as well from the same era. So I don't know how well the modern counters are going to hold up in 40 years or so, 45 years. And what do you expect from cardboard, right? But I'll say this much. I don't know about these in particular. These are kind of thick counters, which is part of the issue, is that they took two pieces and glued them together, kind of like your Quinto has thick counters and such not. And some of those tend to be more vulnerable to falling apart than thinner counters. On the other hand, my War and Peace, I call it War and Pieces, because of the 1,500 counters or whatever, was the most that I had at that time, I think. War and Pieces, using it with a possessive there, counters fell apart on me, within a couple of years. So your mileage may vary. Most of my Avalon Hill games have held together pretty well. I don't know what was done with that particular print run of that particular game, and whether there were others that were equally problematic. But that one, just really horrible. Okay, so anyway, these represent, and let me hit the rest of the counter. So these are fine. They're largely readable. I found the difference between the gray and the white was a little hard to distinguish. Some of the colors are harder. These are useless. This is your money in the game. It is unreadable. I can't imagine anyone wanting to use these. I used poker chips for it. That's fine. In addition to these counters, I had to add some counters from Magic Realm, but not Magic Realm, Wizard's Quest, because each planet on the outer border, each of the planets is represented on the outer border, and that's where your control marker is, as well as your jump gate marker. But there's nothing to indicate who owns what on the board itself. And there's almost, you kind of need to have the representation involved. So I put some little flags out on the planets to indicate who owns what, so that if I knew I was close to something physically, I had a visual clue to that, which was pretty important. I also had to draw up this, and you need to do this. You can't understand the movement paths in the game unless you build the graphs. The problem is there's nothing in the game that allows you to build the graphs, and honestly it would be pretty hard, because if you wanted to build the graphs, it basically is give me a blank thing and I have to be able to manipulate, because sometimes, I start something down here, but oh look, it connects up to the beginning of this one. The one thing that you know is each planet only goes to one and only one other location, and some of those locations may be black holes. Black holes have no ability to transit quickly out of them. You have to move by normal movement, which kind of fits, I'm going to say thematically, because it is really kind of weird in the sense that you'd have to, expend a lot of effort to get away from a black hole, presumably. It doesn't really make sense, but it's got that sort of thematic trapping that is so appropriate to the damn word as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Not every planet has a connection going into it. Because there's 4 black holes and they don't go anywhere, 4 of the chits will not get drawn. It's also possible that a planet may have a chit that goes back to itself. I didn't have this happen, but that would again further skew the whole issue of how the game operates, right? That doesn't really give you anything. It will delay you a turn when you make the jump, I guess, between leaving the planet. But it becomes almost like a black hole in and of itself. An incredibly dense planet. Now, I don't know what the stargates represent, and there is no sort of good model in science fiction, and I'm not even talking science here, but in science fiction itself, that really accounts for this. Hey, I can jump through, there's only one gate at each planet, and I can jump through it and it will take me to another planet, although I've seen some role-playing situations where things like that have kind of existed. So, whatever. But that is the key thing. That is the thing that makes this game special, is this peculiar and unknown topography that is generated each time you play by the random set. Now getting back to components, the last thing is the cards. The cards are kind of cheap stock, about the equivalent to Avalon Hill or SPIs. I'm going to call it more like the SPI ones. They're thinner. I don't know. They're somewhere in between. I've seen some Avalon Hill ones that are very close to this. They're flexible. They can tear, and they're not going to last you very long. Okay. The rule book. It really doesn't nail a lot down, but I think it gets all the key points in place, and you may have to make some decisions as you're reading it and thinking about it, but there really is so little to this game that the rules are really, really simple, and unless you wanted to modify them, there's really not a lot of room for ambiguity in them. I'm hoping I didn't play it all wrong. Somebody tells me, yeah, somebody else who has this one. One other thing that I felt was necessary to write down was planets I did not explore. I had to write down, or planets that I explored but did not colonize. I had to write down what it would take to colonize them and who knew that. This is something else that the game kind of doesn't tell you that you need. There's two big things. One is building that map, the graphs, the unconnected graph of planets as you discover them, so that you understand the movement capabilities. And that's something that's a shared resource. Everybody knows that. But this other thing is a private piece of knowledge that it would be almost impossible. Like there's no easy way to remember it. And you don't want to be playing memory with all of this shit. The game is hard enough using these clues, right? And you would say, well, simple game, why is it so hard? Yeah, Go is hard too, right? The simplicity is where its beauty really lies, because it's got one really clever thing, which is this odd topography, this odd geography that allows you to move in ways that you don't move in any other game. And it's very, very easy. Once you get this down, it becomes much, much easier than some other games that have what feel like more reasonable geometries. So I'm thinking here things like Web and Starship, the 3-player game. I think I've got the name right. Which is, excuse me, okay, not yet. It's coming. It tries to represent 3 dimensions in a really kind of awkward fashion, using number schemes to indicate how far above and below the baseline plane that you are. And it's really, really hard to calculate your distances and directions in that. And I don't remember how bad some of the SPI 3D games were as well. I suspect they had the same kind of problems. Things like Star Force Alpha Centauri, I think, had that kind of display, which were really tricky to deal with. Okay, so what you have here is a tremendously simple system, one that would be horrible if you were using a normal geographical situation, like say an area map or something like that, or just, I don't know so much if you had to move one space per turn all over here. That would be so slow. I don't know what that would represent in terms of play, because you also only have one ship. You have one piece in the game that can take stuff over, which is why this is kind of not a normal 4X type game. It's got sort of this more exploration bent to it, but you exploit by taking the cash from it. Of course, you can't get that cash off of it until your ship visits it again, and you're not allowed to build any defenses or anything until your ship visits it again. This is where it gets crazy, right? These very simple, hard to believe and accept rules, but they do produce something almost magical out of it. Let me think. What are your other exploration, exploitation, extermination? You kind of have that. You get to wipe people out with your crew cards. I mean, these are small colonies, whatever. And I can't remember what the 4th X is. Exfoliation. No. Expansion, I think. You kind of expand, but honestly, the way the game turns out, because of this weird map, that's generated on top of the main map, you end up following these chains, these linked lists, or singly linked lists, to find, and if you end up behind someone else, every location that they visit that's easy to get to, you can follow up and just take from them. So planets tend to change hands very rapidly. Worse than that, because money is accumulated on planets but is unusable until there's a ship there, they become really tasty targets. Not so much because, oh, I want to own planets. No, it's because all the resources are there. And you sail in, you expend your cards and whatever, and you get the resources that are piled up there. Actual exploration and colonization is not very economically profitable. In general, you spend a fair amount of cards, which cost you 100 points each, in order to colonize a planet. At the very least, it costs you 100. You'll get that back in 2 turns if you stick around and wait on the planet to get it, but you don't want to. Now, luckily, you have a lot of money to begin the game with. How's the game won? This is also kind of cute. So there's an automatic victory. If somebody gets to 7 planets, they win the game. This is hard to do, at least in 6 players. There's some room for player elimination. I dropped down to 5 because someone was knocked. They're not like dead or anything, but there's nothing they can possibly do throughout the game. So they essentially are. The game rules don't say anything about it, but you're not playing anymore. You can move your little ship around. It ain't doing anything. You're not allowed to conquer anything, even if it's empty and just teeming with gold. Okay. So it's very profitable to steal someone else's colonies. So you might say to yourself, well, then why would I colonize? Well, for one thing, you might get lucky. You might be in some backwater with your planets. Initially, nothing's hooked up that nothing really goes to. And you'll just be able to collect money on that planet for, forever. And it's just too hard to get to be worth it for somebody else to attack. That's a possibility. It's highly unlikely, because if something gets valuable enough, someone will take a detour on the regular map and take their 6 turns or whatever to get to you and take you out. Because it's worth it. However, you can always be that someone who ends up going back to that planet, collecting the money, and going on. And you have the advantage of not having to fight your way to get the resources from. It's possible that you might have left a big enough garrison on a planet that somebody attacks it and they get beaten. That doesn't help you. You still lose forces, and what that means is your planet's now even weaker and much more of a target, because it's still making money, but it's not making any more troops. And this really gets to the very, very tiny colony, something that's not big enough, and a time scale that's fast enough that you're not like growing a population on the planet, right? These are just resources, and your big ship is somehow able to, at planets that you own, create crew out of, I don't know what. I really don't know what, if they have money. And this is the thing, the expenditures that you make to generate crew, which is your soldiers and as well as your exploration and colonization people. Okay, this just looks weird. I'm looking out at the city and it looks like Christmas lights. I'm looking at Springfield. It looked like somebody had a huge house in front of me with lots of lights on it. My visual processing is beginning to fade in worse and worse ways the more I'm alone. That happens. That's where cobs come from. Even though I started seeing them when I was here and not alone. Although I don't think I've ever seen a cob with someone else. Very close. Maybe. I saw something that looked like a bear when my wife was with me. Not the one that jumped in the river. This was in full daylight. And it probably was a cat about this big, as far as I know. But just the processing got me all wrong. And it looked like a moderately small bear. There's a certain magic that kind of emerges from these very simple systems. It doesn't feel believable or realistic or anything like that, but it's a really cool game. In the same way that Land 4000 is a really cool game, where its neat principle is you set out moving and you don't know where you're going. You may have an idea where you're going, but it doesn't have to be where you end up. You could go in a completely different direction, right, than what you're planning. After you've moved enough spaces. And you know what else does that? War of the Ring does something similar to that, where the Fellowship is moving and they're getting distance. The Fantasy Flight one. They're getting distance, but you don't know exactly where they're going. And neither player knows, which is weird as hell. But yeah, I think this does a better job than Land. Land has a really horrible, it uses a more traditional economic system where you collect up your forces and you build your troops, and you're using kind of like risk-like waves of stuff that you're sending out. It's interesting. It's also kind of never-ending. This, I had worries about that. It isn't. Because, so there's two ways to end the game. One is to get to 7 planets, and then whoever got to 7 planets wins. Auto victory, boom, it's done. The other is when all the planetary jumps have been used once, mapped, whatever you want to call it, the game ends then, and the person with the most money on their ship and on their planets, with a bonus of $100 per planet, wins the game. And I had a very exciting ending where someone was very close to the automatic victory, and they also were in the lead in terms of ending the game. One problem with the ending the game is that I think it's going to, if the game is close, it's going to be very painful to end the game by moving to this system that has not yet been discovered and going through its jump. The reason being, the chances are very, very high that the system that is the last one to be explored in the game is really hard to get to. There's not going to be a link to it, and it's probably going to be a distance from anything anybody has wanted to go to. So nobody's gone to this place. And what that means is it's going to probably take you 6 to 10 turns to get there. That's 6 to 10 turns where you're not out conquering other people's yummies that they're leaving out and growing. There's also an issue with the crew cards. There's a limited number of crew cards. When they run out, I assume that you can't start drawing new ones out of nowhere. And what that means is that it becomes something that you can kind of manipulate whether or not other people are able to build up attack fleets. But all of it came together to produce what I thought was a really, really cool game experience. Something that, you know, I wouldn't look at it and say, oh wow, this really represents X nicely or anything like that at all. This is, there's so much abstraction here that, you know, it feels about as connected to anything believable as like a Euro would. But it's almost like the universe has such different principles. Think games like Sorcerer and whatnot. That you know, you just have to twist your mind to make it work, and start to understand how to win this game and how to attack it in ways to get yourself an advantage over other players. I think it's a real winner. Here's the problem: the components are such shit that I can't suggest going out and getting it. If you can get like a scan of the cards. You could write the rules yourself from what I did on my intro video, or even perhaps from here. There's really very, very little to the game. If you could get a scan of the cards and you know, the board, it would be best, because you're going to need different things from the game itself. You're going to need to get rid of the money, for one thing. That's definitely the case. The little counters that are the jump gate counters, giving you the locations that jump to, they're almost unreadable, man. So unless you have a magnifying glass, you're going to want to print those. as something more readable. There's no reason for them to be the way they were. They could just have the name of the planet, printed diagonally across them in larger font, so that, or larger point size, so that it's readable. As it is, it's almost unreadable. The money, and this is a pretty rare game. I don't think it goes for much. I got mine really cheap, but it's beat up as all shit. But it's hard to find. It's not. I assume. So anyway, there is that. And you could probably just make your own version of it fairly easily without even copying the scanner and things and such on. You got the base idea here. The core idea here is keep everything really fucking simple, and then use this weird linked list wormhole connections that it really shakes things up. And I think there's nothing else exciting about the game, but that one thing within a sea of simplicity is just brilliant. It really is. And I doubt that the designers of it knew how brilliant it is, given, what a piece of shit Quest is and what I've heard about Grand Imperialism. Although some people seem to swear by Grand Imperialism, so I don't know. All right, that's my views.